So we're really honored to have Niaz Dorry with us tonight. She's giving the keynote, Who Feeds Us Matters, Fishermen and Farmers Taking Back Control of Our Food Supply. Niaz is a longtime organizer who we met at the National Family Farm Coalition meeting just last year. And CAGJ is really proud. We couldn't do the work that we do without being part of national and international networks and organizations. And one of the organizations we're most proud to be a member of is the National Family Farm Coalition. I think we're the only organization from Washington State. We're one of the only organizations that's not primarily farmers, that's working in support of farmers and fisher people. We have to start talking about that. And NAMA, the organization that Niaz works for, joined the National Family Farm Coalition recently and was the first fisheries organization to join the National Family Farm Coalition. We're also members through the coalition of La Via Campesina, which is the international network of peasants, farmers, farm workers that's organizing for food sovereignty and is one of the most powerful social movements in the world that we're a part of. So when we were trying to think of somebody who we actually learned about the importance and just had our consciousness raised by members of Niaz's organization and her at other conferences, and wanted to feature that because this dinner is such a great way to raise awareness of a lot of people. And when we thought about who to invite, there really was only one person. Niaz just stood out amongst the different possibilities because the North Atlantic Marine Alliance is one of the only groups, if not the only, that's doing national and international organizing based in the US to promote fisheries as part of the food sovereignty movement. So we invited her, and we're just incredibly honored that she made a long trip here from the East Coast, and we just couldn't be more pleased that you're here to help us start this work. And tonight is just the beginning. One of our solidarity campaigns is focused on supporting small-scale, we used to say farmers, and now we say small-scale producers, and we're going to focus on working in solidarity with small-scale and sustainable fisheries in the Northwest coming out of this dinner. So this is just the beginning, and Niaz being here is really the launch of that work. So please help me welcome Niaz Dorry.
That's right. So it's really particularly exciting to be here because we're seeing that we're able to break out of the fisheries bubble finally. We're beginning to embrace fisheries as part of our food system, and I jokingly say it's the only thing we eat that actually has the word food in it. Yet we have not been looking at it through the food system lens, and what that does to those who are exploiting our marine resources, our natural environments, the communities that depend on them, it gives them a blank check to continue to do that. Because those of you who have started a revolution on our land-based food system and in the social justice movement have not been paying attention to the fisheries world. And so it's exciting to be here. That's why I get emotional, because this is the revolution we've been fighting for. And so it's nice to have that breakthrough. So thank you, Heather. Thank you, Travis. And thank you all for inviting me to be here. I want to tell you a little bit about my background, if you don't mind, because I think, for me at least, it gives it sets up why I do what I do. I've been working on fisheries issues for 20 years, and it happened by accident. In this case, I was working for Greenpeace at the time, and my background is in working on environmental justice issues, economic justice issues, and particularly using community organizing tools. And I worked in communities fighting toxic waste incinerators, pulp and paper mills, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with here. And we were really focused on making sure the communities had what it took to be able to fight that fight on their own, even after Greenpeace left or any organization that they were working with left. And we were winning. We were actually gaining ground. We fought the incinerator in East Liverpool, Ohio. I don't know how many of you know about the WTI incinerator, the world's largest toxic waste incinerator. Unfortunately, we didn't win that fight, but that fight became the fight that stopped all other hazardous waste incinerators around the country. In fact, the day after we organized the massive arrest in front of the White House, the EPA issued a moratorium. That was May 18, 1993. So we know that community organizing, thank you, community organizing leads to long-term change. And the toxics campaign within Greenpeace was experiencing that change. The ocean campaign was stuck. And so they thought, what if we use the same community organizing strategies that we've been doing in toxics work to the ocean work? And so they asked me if I would consider switching campaigns and work on ocean issues. And honestly, it's going to come across a little crass. At first I thought, save the whales. I cannot wrap my head around it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. but I couldn't see the justice elements in it. I was naive, frankly. And then I realized how naive I was the more I began to read about what it is, what the fight for the whales is really about. It's the fight of the indigenous people fighting for their right, for their treaty rights. It's the fight of the communities that have depended on those hunting rights for generations. It's global movement of capital. In that case, the whale was in the crosshairs. In the case of the toxics, it was about global movement of capital, but the communities living in those battlegrounds against those incinerators were in the crosshairs. So it was the air was in the way, the water was in the way in the toxics world, the communities were in the way. When it came to the fight for the oceans, the people were in the way, the water was in the way, the whale was in the way. And suddenly I realized this is beyond the whale. This has nothing to do with the whale. It is, in fact, about global movement of capital. And we have to look at it that way. And that suddenly, the switch got turned in my head, and I could see the environmental justice elements in the fisheries work. I could see the economic justice elements in the fisheries work. So I called up a friend of mine who was from Boston, and I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to switch campaigns, and I'm going to move to Gloucester. How many people here know about New England at all? So you know I just mispronounced that town's name. And so what my friend said is, first things first, you should learn how to pronounce the name of the town you're moving to. And it's Gloucester. So that was 20 years ago, and now I've learned that it's actually Gloucester. Half of it doesn't get pronounced. I'm beginning to become a native in Gloucester. And Seattle being here is actually a little bit of a homecoming for when it comes to the oceans work, because when I started to do the ocean work, the first fight that we began to pick was with the factory trawlers that are based here in Seattle. And not only is the style of factory fishing in itself offensive, but the strategies they use is actually very similar to the strategies we were fighting in the toxics world. Suddenly I began to see just a lot more parallels. In fact, I remember vividly when we were fighting the toxic waste incinerator in Ohio, we found at one point what we thought were a bunch of punctuation errors in permits and in various documents. And those punctuation errors, to give you a little example, it was WTI, comma, Inc., period. The next document was WTI, no comma, Inc., and maybe a period, maybe not. So we thought these are all punctuation errors. Come to find out there were 44 different corporations. And that was the strategy they used to hide their identity, hide the liability, and essentially hide behind this corporate shell game. We learned a lot. I learned a lot. Fast forward a few years later, when I was working on fisheries issues, we discovered there was going to be some factory trawlers that were actually one factory trawler that was, the hull was laid right here in the Tacoma shipyard, and it was an talk about irony. It was the very last ocean incinerator before ocean incineration was banned. So they were retrofitting it in the Tacoma shipyard, bringing it to the Northwest Atlantic Marine area, which is where I work, and they wanted it to fish for some of the very basic, fundamental elements of the marine ecosystem, the fish that everything else ate, the whales and the dolphins and the other larger predators. And as we were sitting in the church basement, very much like this actually, looking at these documents, everybody's just chattering about strategy, and I'm looking at the document the city gave us and the document the company gave us. I'm staring at it, I'm looking, there's punctuation differences between the two. And I thought, you guys, these are two different companies. And everybody thought, no, Niaz, you're just being paranoid. These are just punctuation errors. Come to find out, the company that they were selling to the public, to the community, was actually 98% owned by a Dutch firm that's actually very well known for building factory ships and roaming the oceans for the next place to fish. And so that discovery, that lesson from that other fight really helped us win that fight. And so the more I've dove into the fisheries element, the more I see the parallels. And that's why it's really a huge responsibility for all of us who believe that social justice is the path to go forward, to start embracing fisheries into your work. There are workers' rights issues. There are people working on ships that are being held in slavery conditions. There are child labor being employed in shrimp aquaculture facilities. There are farmers in India whose land is being taken away so we can have cheap shrimp, but at what cost? What is the cost of cheap seafood? It is the loss of land, it's the loss of water, it's the loss of access to real food, and replaced by unidentified food objects. And those are the things that we need to start understanding that is happening. A couple of weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago, I was invited to give a talk at a group of hospitals, and I want to give a shout out to Kathy Pryor. They're from Healthcare Without Harm, because they're one of our partners in this work. And I had to send in my slides, and of all the slides that we had to send in, the ones they didn't want to hear about was slavery in our food system. They actually took those slides out of the presentation. So I thought, well, okay, I'm still going to talk about it. Just because you're not going to see the images doesn't mean you're not going to hear about the story. These things are happening, and what we have going for us in the fisheries world is that those of you who have fought to bring a just food system into play on our land, you have taught us lessons, and we're stealing those lessons and we're applying them to the fishing industry. We stole the concept of community-supported fisheries with one program in Port Clyde, Maine. There's now about 50 of them around the world. And I want to hear a hand for that, by the way. Thank you. And the reason that's such an important move is because at the point when we began to develop these programs, the fishermen, particularly the small and medium-scale fishermen that we work with, are demoralized. They've been relegated to the rapers and pillagers category. We have managed to paint the fishing industry with a broad brush, assuming all they're doing is killing the marine ecosystem. And as a result, we have marginalized those who have the smallest ecological footprint in the marine ecosystem. And so when we talk about fishing, we assume that the factory trawlers and the small tribal fishermen and the small-scale fishing communities that dot these coasts in the US and everywhere else are all the same. They don't care. They're just killing the animals for a profit, and therefore we should just follow those red, yellow, green lists in the Marine Stewardship Council and then pick, we've done our job. Those lists are a great start, but they don't go far enough. They don't address economic justice. They don't address social justice. They don't address tribal rights. They do not address the fact that fishermen are not getting paid enough to even make their ends meet. And therefore, all they can ask for is more fish. If you could not set a price for your product based on your cost of operation, what would you want to do? You would want to sell more product. You demand more fish. Community-supported fisheries created an environment where the public was able to realize that the fisherman's cost is $2.50, and if you're paying $1.50 for it, they're already in the red by the time they get to shore. Who bears that responsibility? And we usually pass it on to the fishermen. It's not my fault that you're not making enough money. It is, because we're not paying attention. We're not including them in these broader conversations, and that's why the community-supported fishery was so important. For once, these fishermen who've been demoralized were becoming face-to-face with people who were eating their catch. They were feeling that energy, and I often talk about getting some love back from their community, and it's about time. And so I hope that's one of the inspirations that some of you take away from this, is to see if you can start a community-supported fishery in Seattle area, because the fishermen that fish for salmon, for crab, for spot shrimp, and I want to give a shout out. Where's Vanessa? That's working with Mangrove Action Project over there. And I want to make sure you all know that there are faces to those animals and the people who catch them. And it's our responsibility as social justice advocates to actually encourage them to continue doing what they're doing in the face of the industrialization, privatization policies that are backed by the Koch brothers. And we don't even know that. And we're inadvertently supporting them because we're closing our eyes to what's happening in the fishing sector. But it's not all doom and gloom. It started with the community-supported fishery. It's expanding to the work we're doing with the healthcare sector. We have hospitals in New England that have set the pace essentially for the healthcare sector to change their buying practices and really truly do no harm by making sure their seafood is coming from their local community. One hospital that I talk about all the time, because in my mind they were the early adopters of this work, Fletcher Allen Healthcare in Burlington, Vermont, of all places, they began to, you know Vermont, you know Fletcher Allen, there you go. So they started to do this work with us starting in 2010, and they found out that the green fish that they were actually buying was caught by factory-style operations in the Bering Sea, sent to China to be done whatever it was done with, and by the time it got to their facility, it had traveled about 15,000 miles. And so they switched and started to buy regional seafood, locally caught seafood, and they immediately reduced their carbon footprint to less than 1,000 miles. So that's just one element of it. And then they began to pay attention to how much are those fishermen getting paid. One other hospital we worked with in Massachusetts, Boston Children's Hospital, I was telling this story earlier to someone, and we told them we didn't want to be too rough on them. We said, we want you to just do one thing different. Ask for the name of the boat. The name of the boat. And then you can figure out, look up that boat, see if the scale or their values really meet your values. They asked their vendor, what's the name of the boat? The vendor wouldn't give it to them. Overnight, they changed vendors because they realized there was an issue there that they were hiding. So change can happen if we introduce the right questions at the right time to the right audience, and I feel like the right time has come to start infusing the food system conversations and the social justice movement with the concept that fisheries are part of our food system. Fishing is part of our local economies. The tribal people, I'm so glad to be sitting with and I'm beginning to lose my mind because Louis and Valerie, thank you. And they were talking to me about the challenges of the tribal people. And so it's and you guys live in the lands, on lands that are occupied by the tribal people, and it should be that way. And their fisheries are in danger because of industrialization, privatization policies that are being sanctioned by some of the big environmental organizations. And I don't want to talk badly about some of the environmental groups that have been pushing for some of these policies, but it's time. It's time to break that logjam and start taking some of that power back. Much like you're doing with the Bill Gates Foundation, it's time to break that logjam that's privatizing our oceans. It's privatizing our fisheries. So let's do it. So currently, our work involves, and often, one of the other reasons why this is a little bit of a homecoming for me is the name of our organization is Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance. And every time I say it, people say, oh, so you work in Seattle. And so I have to always explain, no, you got to look at it from the ocean's perspective. We're working in the northwest part of the Atlantic Ocean, and really Seattle is the northeast part of the Pacific Ocean. And so they have this little moment of, what? And so our work started regionally in the New England area to try to organize those fishing communities, because at the time we were realizing we were losing our small and medium scale fisheries really fast, and privatization policies were taking hold. But because we've managed to bring this broad base of support to this work, the food system activists, the social justice movement, National Family Farm Coalition has been critical in helping us get that message out. We've now begun to find fishing communities around the world and around the US who don't hear this in other marine conservation worlds are gravitating to this work. We just had our last Fish Locally Collaborative is our network, and we had our assembly. We had about 60 fisher folks that came to help strategize for the next year from down in Belize and Alaska and Europe and throughout the US, and we suddenly felt that the revolution is indeed beginning, and we're seeing those faces in the room more and more. And it's my hope that we can see more and more of you in there, in that work, and within the Fish Locally Collaborative's message. In fact, I wanted to encourage you to consider the law that manages fisheries. It's called the Magnuson Act. It's a long name, Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation, blah, blah, blah. We call it the Fish Bill. Just remember it as the Fish Bill. And that has the similar components as the Farm Bill in it. And just much like the Farm Bill, it ignores the fact that the activity that we're trying to regulate is about feeding people. And so we've come up with 4 platforms for the next reauthorization of the Magnuson Act, the Fish Bill. And the one we're getting the most resistance to, guess which one it is? Having fisheries considered as part of our food system. And so that tells you that this work is truly revolutionary, that it is threatening those who are only interested in global movement of capital, using the antiquated formula for economic efficiency, high volume, low value operations. Whoever can catch the most amount of fish the cheapest way possible wins. It's time they lose. And that's what our opportunity is with the Fish Bill. And that law is coming up for reauthorization, and they're telling us, oh, your stuff is too little too late. I don't think so. And I think it's time for us to show the power of the social justice movement, harnessing it and bringing it to bear. And I hope to see all of your signatures on those letters as they get circulated. I know that we're not just here to hear me talk. There's great food to be eaten. There's Valerie to be heard. There are other people to be talking to. But I really want to just close by, again, thanking you for opening your hearts, your brains, your world, your arms to the concept that fisheries need to be included in your work, in your thoughts, and in your strategies. And I know that when I go back to our communities and the update that I write for the fishing communities that I work with, to share with them the energy that is in this room, which is part of the reason why I get emotional, and that the interest that there is to really change the system, it gives them hope.
Very excited when Valerie Segrest agreed to join us. Many of you, I'm sure, remember Valerie and Elise Krohn's keynote at the 2012 SLEE Dinner back at St. Demetrius. Valerie founded the Muckleshoot Food Sovereignty Project, And she's a native foods educator and community nutritionist working with the Northwest Indian College and is a registered member of the Muckleshoot Tribe. She recently organized an action on GE Salmon, and GE Salmon is an issue that CAGJ recently, at our last strategic meeting, thought salmon is so vital culturally in the Northwest and economically, and the GE Salmon issue is something we'd love to raise more awareness about. Perhaps we should do a campaign focused on this issue. So tonight, Valerie's helping us begin that work.
So thank you for reminding me that there is strength and a lot of forward momentum in the movement. And I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about how important salmon really is. You know, here in the Pacific Northwest, in our Coast Salish region, pre-contact, our food system fed people for a very, very, very long time. If you ask a Muckleshoot tribal member, we might say since time began. We were eating food here off of the land. We were eating salmon. And from Whitecap to Whitecap, mountaintop to Puget Sound waters, which is in some places just 50 miles, pre-contact we were eating over 300 different kinds of foods that were grown here in the Northwest region, 20 different varieties of huckleberries. We have food ecosystems around alpine forests and lower woodland forests, and the cultural keystone species is salmon. It is our lifeblood, and people knew that. They knew that it was so important that we, to this day, organize our life around salmon. You know, and when I think about salmon, I think about what it takes to be a food activist. You know, the idea of it going out to the ocean and every year returning to its ancestral rivers, all of the barriers that it gets through to give its life. And my elders tell me that those salmon runs, you know, they used to come back upon the millions, that our runs were so abundant, you could walk across the back of salmon to get across the river. So nowadays, we have a lot of tribal folks, tribal communities, and a lot of people out there in the movement who are working really hard to make sure that salmon come back and that they have a place to come back home to. And that, you know, by doing that, they're coming back with their bodies rich, full of sea salt and minerals, and feeding the forest, feeding the plant people, feeding the rivers, feeding the animals that eat those things, feeding other marine species, and ultimately feeding us humans. So when I think about, you know, needing to be, how do I live a life that's full of love and abundance? I think about the salmon people, because that's what they show us by just doing. And they don't have to stand and talk about it at all, like, you know, I'm doing tonight. They just live their life that way. And they do it relentlessly, you know, it's their dedication. So how might I live my life that way? How can I stand up for what I believe in and refuel and give my body back in a way that supports our food system, not just for today, but for the future. So when we're thinking about, you know, feeding people, it goes much farther than just farming and ranching, which is really, really good work. But I'm so inspired tonight to hear about the support around fisheries, because for us, for the coastal people of the Northwest, we are fishermen, we are hunters, we are cultivators of the land. We do much more than just foraging, which might remind you of stumbling upon things in the woods. There are very intentional interventions into our food system that we've done since time immemorial to promote the abundance and growth for the future. So I think that we can all do that here. And I've been asked to come and talk about genetically engineered salmon specifically. So with all that in mind, because tribal communities are just one, you know, we're just one very significant consumer of fish. It's about our identity. It's about who we are. It reminds us of who we are. It's our medicine. But it's also, you know, in all my travels all over the world, people think, oh, Seattle, Pacific Northwest, salmon. So it's everybody's issue. And right now there are so many things that are being organized around issues of salmon that it's hard for us to focus on just one. And just like Niaz was saying, there are these underlying corporations that are doing things really silently in the background. Right now we're dealing with Aqua Bounty, a transnational corporation which has developed a genetically modified salmon species, which basically takes the genes of an eelfish and a gene from a Chinook, Pacific Chinook salmon, and infuses that into an Atlantic salmon. And this is currently being decided whether it's going to be on the market or not at the FDA level, and they're passing it as a food additive. So the idea of bellying up to a plate of food additive just sounds delicious to me. And then also the idea is to actually hatch the fish in our northwestern waters, ship them down to Panama, grow them to full size, and then put them on the market. They do not want it to be labeled because they say it's too confusing for consumers. And so I think that it's just something that's really important to keep on our radar. When I first learned about this, I took it to my tribal council in Muckleshoot. It didn't take very long it took moments, I think, before I shut up, that our entire tribal council was on board with passing a resolution opposing the production of GE salmon. So I'm very proud to announce that Muckleshoot was the first to do that, but then we also carried it to the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, which represents all of the Northwest tribes, and it was passed no-brainer on that level. And then 2 months ago, we took it to the National Congress of American Indians, which it was passed like that. So this is, it's a direct attack for us on our cultural identity. Once again, it's what we organize our entire life around. It's important for us to make sure that we honor that fish as it's given its life for so many generations in order for us to sustain life. Salmon is part of my DNA, my makeup, and I feel, and it's definitely not an additive or a supplement. It's got big medicine, and it's something that we should all be standing up for, because it is the pillar of our entire food system here in the Northwest, especially. It's not just a human consumption, it is the entire diverse food system that we live in that has been feeding people for very, very, very long time.